Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to re-examine the last photo, and I'm going to take you through a working theory of it. A working theory is a definition or idea that may not be exactly right, but is good enough to use when you start working on something. In the Chris Watts case, we had the shadow on the driveway. In the Summer Wells case, we have this image. Is that a bruise on the right side of Summer's forehead, the side facing towards the milk jugs? Let's assume it is a bruise. For me, the fact that Summer could just as conceivably be asleep based on her appearance makes me inclined to think that there was no injury, no trauma. What's being speculated about here is blunt force trauma, when it's hard to tell whether even the surface skin is broken. There's even a sense that maybe Summer's asleep. But if it is a bruise, it's so faint as to be virtually invisible. And those sorts of wounds are very rarely life-threatening. But what if Summer did bang her forehead while playing in the water? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment. Thank you to the many of you who have subscribed since the last video. And let's get started. So if we take the fabric of the video at face value, and I'll put a link to the TikTok video that Candace took, what do we see? Well, we see Summer herself jumping almost face first into shallow water. In murky water strewn with submerged rocks and debris, that's a recipe for disaster. So when we break it down and we ask the question, what happened here? Was there a fall or a dive? What we know from Macbeth's sister's account is that Summer apparently fell off a rock. That's also possible, but is it more probable? And naturally, Summer falling means no one is culpable. But if no one is culpable, where is Summer? If she was injured in an accident, why not take her somewhere for medical treatment? Now, in the video footage, we also see Macbeth striding in the shallow water behind Summer and towards Summer. We also see him playfully slap the water, spraying her with a few drops. What happened after that? Wouldn't he have picked her up and thrown her in, or allowed her to dive in the water off his shoulders? In a scenario like that, we can imagine a more severe injury, not only to her head, but perhaps to her neck. If the water was shallow enough, she could also have had the air knocked out of her lungs. She could also have gotten water into her lungs. And this brings us to the second point: how long was she under the water? There doesn't seem to be any disputing whether Summer was under the water, just how long she was under the water. The initial report was 1 minute, which is a significant amount of time. Subsequently, we've heard this amount of time minimized down to about 15 seconds. Regardless of the length of time, what if this is a case not only of being under the water, but suffering a concussive head injury at the same time? In other words, Summer may have been under the water because of an injury she received when she hit something that was barely submerged. This happens all the time, of course. In watery settings like this, where the water is opaque and there are submerged objects. In other words, what I'm talking about here is perhaps a combination of things, something like jumping off Macbeth's shoulders, or him launching her into the air, and then you're having a combination of hitting her head and then being underwater for a certain length of time. And then those things working in concert with one another to aggravate whatever injury she sustained. The next question is medication. Was there any medication used, or what kind of treatment would have happened after this possible incident? So let's assume Macbeth and Candace were presented with a situation of Summer possibly concussed. What would they have done? One possibility is CPR. In a scenario like this with a very small child, it might be very easy to exacerbate the condition she was in. It might be easy to make the trauma even worse. A 5-year-old's body and lungs are small and fragile, and double-handed compressions could be excessive. If Summer was conscious, could there have been a temptation to offer her grandma's medication? If Summer was conscious and in pain, could there have been a temptation to offer her grandma's medication to settle her down? And that brings us to the fourth and final point. What were Candace and Macbeth doing? What was 39-year-old Candace and 15-year-old Macbeth doing when all of this happened? So one scenario is that Macbeth was playing with Summer. Another scenario could be that Candace was, that Summer was sort of being almost like a tennis ball thrown from the one to the other, or swimming from the one to the other, and there was something like that going on. But what if something else was happening where Candace and Macbeth were on land and Summer was in the water? Perhaps she'd gone off exploring, or perhaps she was just continuing to swim while they were doing something else, right? Now, bear in mind, Macbeth is a minor, so Candace could be in a world of trouble if either or both of them were under the influence, especially under these circumstances. If some had been injured in some way while Candace was under the influence, then there would be trouble, wouldn't there? If one or both were intoxicated, this might explain why one or both would not have wanted to seek help for some at the time. So if you just imagine a scenario where you stretch the length of time out a little bit, and they're spending more and more time at the waterhole. What is happening while they're at the waterhole? Well, Summer is swimming more. Well, what is happening with Candace and Macbeth? What are they doing in excess, right? And if that was the case, you might have a situation of impaired judgment that might have led to the decision to wait for the intoxication to wear off. So they may have been dealt with certain cards, and they may have thought, well, perhaps it wouldn't even have been possible to drive under those circumstances, but then I suppose they could have called for EMS, right? But I think the issue remains that there may have been a temptation to wait for the intoxication to wear off and perhaps allow Summer the opportunity to recover. And one sort of gets that feeling when you see Candace in the vehicle with Summer in that video. You get the almost a sense that, well, are they waiting for something, or have they been waiting for something to happen, except it didn't happen? Were they waiting for Summer to regain consciousness? Did they think that she would just sort of come out of it in the same way that one comes out of being drunk or intoxicated? And so perhaps this initial bad decision was then compounded by another decision, perhaps to cover up whatever had happened to Summer. If this happened at or before 2 o'clock, if whatever had happened to Summer happened at around 2 o'clock, then there were at least 4 hours in which to conceal or get rid of Summer before calling 911. A lot can happen in 4 hours. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I know I actually said the next video is going to be about David Dodson, quite an eccentric character in the story. I will be getting to him in due course, more than likely in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.